there, and welcome to Power Play on this Thursday. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa. Tonight, Trump's new trade deal.
This one just went very smoothly, went quickly and smoothly, and a lot of common sense, as I like to say.
The U.S. president inks a trade deal with the U.K. as this country remains in the throes of a trade war with our biggest trading partner. On the cusp of Parliament's return, what do Canadians expect of their politicians in this moment? Former Conservative leader Erin O'Toole is here live exclusively with us in studio with his take in moments. Then, the Prime Minister's Unity Challenge.
I will respect the outcome of citizen-initiated referenda.
We very much believe that there is a path forward with this new Prime Minister.
Is Canada facing a national unity crisis? Saskatchewan's Premier Scott Moe will be here coming up. Then we'll take the question to our front bench with Christy Clark, Tony Clement, and Nathan Cullen. Plus, an American Pope, Cardinal Robert Prevost, becomes Pope Leo XIV, the Catholic Church's first American leader. Canadian politicians are reacting. We're going to share that reaction with you and take you live to Vatican City for the latest a little bit later on in the show. First, though,
This deal just fell into place. The Prime Minister did a fantastic job. His representatives are total professionals, and they got along well, and it just seemed to work. And I think one of the reasons it did is because we blew up the whole system. If we would have just been dealing with you separately or, country by country, we blew up the whole system. It was very fair to very unfair to the United States. And I think because of that, this worked out so nicely. And I'm honored that it was the first deal.
U.S. President Donald Trump there announcing a trade deal to reduce some tariffs on the United Kingdom, an agreement reached more than 2 months after British Prime Minister Keir Starmer sat down with Trump at the White House. Prime Minister Mark Carney, meanwhile, got a warm reception in the Oval Office Tuesday, but no public or substantive movement on Trump's trade war or 51st state obsession. The Prime Minister is bringing back the House of Commons at the end of this month, but he's coming back 3 seats short of a majority, meaning he'll need to work with the opposition on any legislated response to Trump's trade war. With us now on how that may play out is former Conservative Party leader Erin O'Toole. He's now the president of AIDIT North America and a distinguished fellow at the Hudson Institute. AIDIT or ADIT? I'm sorry.
ADIT,
my
fine.
apologies. I knew I would mess that up. Thank you very much, Mr. O'Toole, for joining us. I appreciate you making the time. And I did want to start off on the question of Trump in really sort of what Canadians are expecting of their politicians at this point in time. You wrote a Substack. You have a Substack on it this week, and I read it with great interest. Do you think they expect something differently of politicians than they might have even 6 months ago?
I think they do. And that was the point of my essay on Substack was the country is greater than any political party. And all politicians will have to realize they have to put the best interests of the country first. And so I've been saying everyone should be cheering for Prime Minister Carney, hoping that he can have success. I think he had a very successful first meeting with the president, because that relationship is so fundamental to Canada. It's our most important trade relationship. It's our singularly most important defense and security relationship. And it's been horrific to see how unfairly we've been treated, how we've been disrespected by the president. It's shocking to Canadians. So we want the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, to do well. And I've seen my Conservative colleagues say the same thing. So I think if that's coming out of an election that was fought hardly, people talking like that, that's a very good sign for the country.
As someone who understands the nature of partisan politics very well, who led a political party, is it, do you think, going to be difficult to sustain that? And what would your best advice be to try and do so?
I think right now that Prime Minister Carney has done 2 things that I think are critical. Had a very important meeting with Premier Smith before that meeting with President Trump, making sure we have as much alignment, particularly because of the differences between energy in the West and manufacturing, like auto industry in Ontario. So that was key. I also like the fact that he said straight up, I'm not going to play games on Mr. Poilievre getting into the House. Kudos to Damien Couric, a good friend, for making a tough decision to step away, but an important one to let his leader get into the House. The fact that the Prime Minister could rag the puck for 6 months, and I know Prime Minister Carney likes hockey analogies, so ragging the puck would not have been good for national unity. We need to see our democracy function. Pierre needs to get in the House. But I think on the U.S. trade relationship, the Conservatives, I'd certainly like them to see them put the country first and wish the Prime Minister well.
Substantively, where do you think there are possibilities for the Conservatives to support the federal government? Like, where, and I'm not saying the federal government has said they're going to pursue it explicitly, but like, where do you see opportunity for what you're describing to actually take place?
Well, there's two key areas, Vashi. The first is energy. You know, I was in Prime Minister Harper's cabinet. You know, Prime Minister Harper used to say Canada is an energy superpower. I heard Mr. Carney use that term. It shocked a lot of people. But that's the first ground where there could be a lot of common cause. And most of the trade surplus that we have, Mr. Trump views it as losing to Canada. No, he's winning because he's getting our energy at a discount. And so Canadian resources, from oil and gas to uranium to potash, it's energy security, food security. The other thing there's common cause is both leaders talked about the Arctic and doing more on defense, and particularly in the Northwest Passage. We could propose joint work in the Northwest Passage with the United States, much like we do in the St. Lawrence Seaway. There doesn't seem to be much distance between the two parties on that. The Americans have been asking for us to do more on defense, going back to President Obama said it when he was in the House of Commons. So I think those are two areas right off the top that not only have some alignment between what Pierre was saying and what Prime Minister Carney is saying, but also what the Americans want to see from us as a more reliable, more dependable ally.
Can you do that? Can you support those measures and also maintain your identity as not, a party, but also a party that opposes the government and ultimately wants to topple them at some point?
I think so. And, Pierre will have to, assemble a bit of a new team, take a bit of a fresh approach. Because the reality, Vashi, is we've been advocating on those things for many, many, many years. I used to talk about the Arctic incessantly as an MP. Canadians are now ready to listen. You see the social license. Canadians, Quebecers interested in possibly supporting a pipeline. That was just not the case 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. It's changing. So the Conservatives were actually ahead of the curve on a lot of these issues. But the country wasn't quite ready for those nation-building projects. The country is now. I see that. I live in Toronto now, work across the country. There's support for more Canadian self-assuredness, more self-reliance. And they now understand that energy is a huge asset for us. I think it'll be key to getting the Americans back to the table. So I think Prime Minister Carney knows this. He also knows the strong support for the resource sector the Conservatives have. So the Conservatives can say, hey, we've been pushing this for years, and then really make the case that we're a government in waiting and we deserve your trust in the future.
When you talk about the U.S. coming back to the table, I'm wondering what you think the end goal for Canada is, and ultimately, like, what our objective in any kind of negotiations. I don't even know necessarily what form they're taking, but we've just literally, had a deal with a partner that contravened it on multiple occasions. Like, how will that inform and impact whatever comes next? And how do we, I guess, define what we want out of it when we know that's a reality?
The only certainty right now is uncertainty with President Trump, but he seems, as the UK deal shows us today, he seems to be interested in quick bilateral deals. And so we do have USMCA. If it's not being respected, and if it could be fully renegotiated in a year, perhaps we can get a deal where he basically respects those tenets, reduces tariffs on auto and steel and aluminum. And I've often said energy security and the Prime Minister or the President's desire to rebuild the American shipbuilding industry, to rebuild their national defense capability, they need our aluminum. They need our steel and our supply chains for defense just as much as they do for auto. So I think the meeting Prime Minister Carney had was good because it seemed to establish a reset of tone. And there will still be, the odd taunt on Truth Social. We can't lose sight of the big picture, which is reestablishing smart dialogue and then using our natural assets like resources, like energy, like decarbonizing the electricity grid. Only Canada shares defense with the US. Only Canada shares the electricity grid with the US. We're not like the UK or France or other countries. So let's leverage that and get as much of a bilateral deal as we can to give manufacturers and employers some certainty.
Do you think that Donald Trump was the ballot box question in this federal election?
I think he was a big part of it. the Liberals did something I was mesmerized by. Really, they had a cabinet shuffle of really just one important minister, the first minister, the prime minister. Everyone else is the same. So, you know, the people that were defending the carbon tax are now silent and in the cabinet. Same with the capital gains, all this sort of stuff. I think people were surprised by the tone of Trump this time, the governor of the 51st state, but they were also surprised that the Liberals not only changed Mr. Trudeau, but in 10 days, Mr. Carney basically jettisoned several of the key pillars of Mr. Trudeau's time. And he also went to Paris and the UK very quickly to show that, hey, we have other friends. I think Canadians like that. I thought that was very smart to do, to show the Americans we have a lot of friends, including two countries that were part of our founding. We're going to survive. We're going to stand up. But I've said we need to have elbows up, but we also need to smarten up because we have to spend more in defense. A number of things that we should have been doing. I think Mr. Carney has pivoted the Liberal Party in a way that surprised people. So I think those two factors made for a challenging election for us.
Do you think it surprised your party? Do you think it surprised Mr. Poilievre and his team?
Well, I think, you know, the one thing that they got used to having strong poll numbers. And I think a lot of people thought that Mr. Trudeau was going to stay. And then it was going to be a referendum election, you know, throw the bums out type election, which is often how we see change in Canada. This was radically changed in late fall, early in this new year. And I think Pierre did adapt to it, but I think not to the extent we needed to. And so that'll be part of the learnings they have. There's a lot of great new things, a lot of new seats. We're going to see some new MPs. Areas like Windsor in Ontario, we're not used to seeing a lot of Conservatives come out of that part of the province. So there's a lot of wins in a loss that was also disappointing. I also know how much Pierre and his family have put into it. My family did that. I have so much respect for anyone that does. But they also have to learn some of these lessons because we could see a two-party system in Canada for the next few years at least while the NDP is rebuilding. That will help Mr. Carney sort of have a functioning majority if the NDP is rebuilding and need to lend him their support. So the Conservatives need to take note of successes and what worked, but also take note of what we have to do to win in a two-horse race.
I guess just a final question on that change, because I read, again, you sort of talked about it in your Substack, and you've mentioned tonight the idea of tone. Do you think there needs to be a change in tone in the leader, for example, particularly when it comes to dealing with people like Doug Ford or Tim Houston? And I would point to I think it was during the campaign or maybe just before, the campaign manager, you know, you had said something nice about Anita Anand when she announced she was leaving, and she called you out on Twitter, and that sort of, I guess, had a lot of people talking about the tone that was being employed. It was emblematic, I think, of what some have criticized the party for. Do you share in that criticism? I don't know if you've responded to that call out, but
well,
I would like to know.
Anita didn't leave, you know. So
she came back,
I think she owes me lunch or something after that. Look, I got started in politics, and I said this in my Blue Stack Substack. Please subscribe. Yeah. I started as a PC in Ontario and then in Nova Scotia. So Doug Ford, Tim Houston are great Canadians. They're my friends. I think when the Conservatives need to grow the tent and win, we've got to make peace with our provincial cousins. Sometimes we will have adverse interests, but you know, our provincial cousins also include Scott Moe. It also includes Danielle Smith, the BC party, which has been in change. So I think, you know, part of it is the provincial scene is changing. Doug Ford is a very different premier than, say, Mike Harris. But that means the federal party has to rebuild those ties, because when the provinces may be in power and strong, the federal government or the federal party often isn't. And our volunteers, our donors, often our staffers are a lot of the same people. So let's make peace. Let's learn. I want to see Pierre get back in the House because he's very good in the House. So he'll be out of that for a little bit. But there's a lot of positives from this. But I do think overall tone is something I think the leader has to acknowledge himself, but also the whole caucus. I'd like to see caucus do more interviews like this. We've got a lot of smart men and women that step up to serve. They should never skip a debate. They should never skip an appearance to try and give their vision for the country, because the Conservatives had a lot of great ideas on energy, the Arctic, on defense spending, and we shouldn't shy away from them.
And you believe Mr. Poilievre should stay?
Yeah, I think he's earned that right to stay. I think leaders should be given a second chance. Won't be applied retroactively to me. I'm fine with that. But there was a lot of great wins, and some of the labor outreach that I started, Pierre continued, and that helped us in Windsor and Hamilton. So I'm very proud of some of those breakthroughs, as he should be. But then you also, like we used to do in the military, after contact, you have an after-action report, what went right, what went wrong, and I think they're going to be doing that.
I'll leave it on that note. Mr. O'Toole, a pleasure. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it.
Good to see you again.
That's Erin O'Toole, former leader of the Conservative Party. We're going to talk about this and a whole lot more with our front bench coming up a little bit later on. Christy Clark, Tony Clement, and Nathan Cullen will be here. I also want to tell you that we're going to take you live to Vatican City, where, of course, Catholic cardinals have now elected the first ever American Pope, Robert Francis Prevost. He's going to be known as Pope Leo XIV. We've got some brand new reaction coming in from Canadian political leaders, including Prime Minister Carney, who just posted this to social media. I offer my prayers and best wishes, to His Holiness Pope Leo XIV on his election, an historic day for Catholics and all who look to the Vatican for guidance. At a time of global challenges, may his pontificate carry forward a mission of solidarity, compassion, and dignity for all. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has also shared a statement on social media. It reads in part, "Congratulations to Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost on his election as Pope Leo XIV. As the first Pope from North America, I am hopeful that his tenure will be particularly meaningful for Canadian Catholics. May his tenure as Supreme Pontiff help lead the Catholic Church to renew the faith of its members and help promote peace, justice, and truth throughout the world." We are going to take a quick commercial break here on Power Play. On the other end of that break, Saskatchewan's Premier Scott Moe will join me. Back in just a moment with more.
What I have said is that I will respect the outcome of citizen-initiated referenda, and that's why it's my job to make sure it doesn't get to that point. I want Canada to be strong and united, and for provincial jurisdiction to be respected, and that's what I'll be working towards.
That's Alberta Premier Danielle Smith on this program last night, saying that while she does not support Alberta leaving Canada, she would respect the results of a referendum that voted in favor of separation. Following Prime Minister Mark Carney's first call with premiers yesterday, Ontario's Doug Ford announced the Prime Minister would hold his first in-person sit-down with those premiers in Saskatoon next month. Scott Moe is the Premier of Saskatchewan. Hi, Premier Moe. Pleasure to welcome you back to the program. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you, Vashti.
I wanted to start off and ask you about your meeting with the other premiers and the Prime Minister following his meeting in the Oval Office with U.S. President Donald Trump. Following that meeting, are you more or less optimistic than a week ago about Trump's trade war with Canada?
I would say optimistic, and I always have been optimistic that we would find a path in the trade that happens across North America, across the 49th parallel between Canada and U.S. is important for both countries, and I view it as one of the strongest trading relationships in the world. And so I've always been optimistic we'd find a way, despite where the conversation's been. But I'd say I'm even more optimistic given the Oval Office meeting that happened the other day.
What is in your view, what should be the ultimate objective of Canada if we are to embark on, I'm not sure whether to call them more formal conversations with our American counterparts or negotiations? Like, what's the end goal in your view for this country?
Well, I think the end goal is to build off the strength of the USMCA agreement. And I heard the president, talk about that being a solid foundation of an agreement to build off of, and to include even more items in that agreement. And those trade agreements, they morph and change over time as products change, and they are worthy to be reviewed every 5 or 7 years or whatever that might be. And so for me, success would be to find our way into that review sooner rather than later, and to expand and build on the very foundation of USMCA, which I think is a solid agreement, and I'm hopeful that the president has come to that realization as well.
You're right to point out that he did make a few comments in that meeting where he seemed to say, broadly he supports the USMCA, but his actions over the past few months have very specifically contravened the conditions that it sets out. Can you trust the Americans on a new USMCA? Like, is there a point in renegotiating an agreement that he could just contravene at any moment, as he has over the last few months?
Yeah, there's no doubt that there's changes in the relationship given what's happened the last number of months, and that's a fair question. Can you trust the Americans to live up to a USMCA agreement? And I think we as Canadians have to at least try, and we have to work within the relationship that we have. They are our largest and most significant trading partner, have been for decades, and likely will continue to be into the foreseeable future. And so we need to be at that table, and Prime Minister Carney, post-election, certainly is. The relationship seems to be far stronger with the new Prime Minister than it was with the previous Prime Minister, and so I very much am optimistic as I look ahead to building on the foundation that we have in the USMCA agreement today, expanding it, and finding a way back to free and fair trade with our largest trading partner, the United States, as well as Mexico.
So you think Mexico should be part of trilateral discussions? Because lots of the conversation, or at least the rhetoric over the past little while, has been about a bilateral negotiation. Should it be trilateral in your view?
In my view, yes, and it has been, and the USMCA is trilateral, and not only from Saskatchewan's perspective do we do significant trade in the U.S., but increasing and fairly significant trade with Mexico as well, and I think there's opportunities to do more. And when we talk about energy dominance, it needs to be from a North American perspective. Food security, manufacturing security, that all really does have to be viewed from a North American perspective. And so, yeah, we'd be in favor of a trilateral deal. Although Mexico is a smaller trading partner for Saskatchewan than the U.S., obviously, I think there's still an important and increasing opportunities for us in Saskatchewan, at least there, and likely Canada.
Is it your view that the federal government is aligned with your government on that they also want it to be trilateral?
Yeah, I'd said this on our call, and I'd say it publicly. The provinces very much are there to educate and advocate with all of the folks around the president. It's their national government, our prime minister, that will really set the parameters as to what are the priorities for a trade agreement from Canada's perspective. And our hope is always that they do that in consultation with industry and provinces and such. And I feel that starting to happen. And I won't say that it always has in the years gone by. And so, we're pretty satisfied with, where we are today relative to where we were maybe 2 weeks or 2 months ago with our relationship with the U.S. The whole, very foundation of where the USMCA agreement is today, where we see it going over the course of the next number of months and years. And so I think there is a lot of alignment between Saskatchewan and Prime Minister Carney's position. And we're thankful that relationship seems to be improving rather than where it has been, not too long ago.
I want to pick up more specifically on the relationship between your province and the federal government. The leader of the NDP in your province has introduced legislation this week to essentially increase the threshold for a referendum. She says, her name is Carla Beck, that's against the background of increased talk around separation. Doesn't she have a point that perhaps that threshold should be higher if that specter of separation is being bandied about more easily?
It's already extremely high, and actually has been identified by the elections officer in Saskatchewan in a review he did a few years ago as likely never being met at the current level. And what she's proposing is to double it. And listen, every 4 years, Canadians have an opportunity to make a choice on who is going to govern them. And in between those 4 years, there are opportunities for referendums and various pieces of referendum legislation across Canada. Saskatchewan's metric on a citizen petition to have a referendum is extremely high. It's 15% of the entire electorate. And the election officer said that likely is not going to be met, or not going to be met easily. And so what the NDP is introducing in Saskatchewan is really an effort on their part to silence the voters' voices in the province. We don't agree with that. Voters do have an opportunity to have their voice heard through meeting the extremely high criteria that we currently have here. But in saying that, there's also this straw man argument that the NDP in Saskatchewan are putting out that it's either separation separation or it's the status quo. And we actually believe there's an opportunity to work with the new Prime Minister on everybody giving a little bit and finding a path forward that works for Saskatchewan to grow and prosper within a strong United Nation of Canada. And that is the path that we are charting and are attempting and making every effort to chart with the new Prime Minister, Prime Minister Carney.
And I certainly take that point, but I'm not sure that the opposition there is arguing for the status quo. I remember doing interviews with you, for example, on your opposition to the carbon tax, and they shared with you an opposition to the imposition of that backstop from the federal government. On this point, on the issue of separation, for example, I listened to a scrum with you from about a week ago in which you were asked on multiple instances if you would, like, specifically outright say it's never going to happen, you're not in favor, you wouldn't vote that way, and you weren't clear in that instance. Your answer has since evolved, but if you were in the opposition and you heard that kind of lack of specificity initially, wouldn't you also be worried about the uncertainty, for example, that the specter of separation could impart on Saskatchewan's economy?
Listen, there is some frustration in this province, and I can't implore on just how serious some of that frustration is. And that frustration is present in Saskatchewan due to policy decisions that have been made by the previous Prime Minister and his government for close to a decade now. And policy decisions that have had a very significant impact on the way that Saskatchewan people and families create the wealth, not only in their family, but in their communities. And so the frustration that you are hearing about in Saskatchewan communities is very, very real. That's not in any way saying that this is a government that supports what would be the nuclear option, which is to start to advocate to secede from Canada. We very much believe that there is a path forward with this new Prime Minister and whoever is in his cabinet for him and his government to change course from a policy perspective. Yes, we would have some opportunities to give in certain areas as well, to find some common ground, and to ensure that those frustrations maybe can be satisfied to some degree, and Saskatchewan can get back to doing what we do, which is providing food, fuel, and fertilizer for the world and attracting investment from all around the world. So we very much don't accept the premise that there's only those two options, a status quo, of which the NDP has supported every step of the way for the last 4 years in those federal policies that have caused that frustration, or separation, which is what here in Saskatchewan the NDP can't seem to stop talking about now.
With all due respect, and I certainly agree with your point that the sentiment of being overlooked in Saskatchewan and in Alberta should not be dismissed in any way. And in fact, I've taken that to many federal ministers on many instances to push back against their own framing. But when you talk about the frustrations of the policies of the last decade, for example, informing that kind of the specter of separation, I looked at your province's website to find out about how the economy was doing. Capital investment year over year up 10.8%, GDP growth up 2.3% year over year. What is the evidence that the policies that you have pinned the blame on have led to the destruction of Saskatchewan's economy? In fact, the statistics show something very different, which could lead Canadians to believe that you are instead fanning the flames of those frustrations for your own political utility.
We can even do better. And we can attract more investment and create more opportunity. We're a very growth-focused government at the provincial level. And the investments that we're seeing happen, new potash mines and such, are very much been in spite of federal policy that has been changed over the course of the last decade. Bill C-69, for example, some of the egress opportunities that we have been limited. And we can go on with respect to the competitiveness of the industries that are operating here and the opportunities that they have. We think it can be even greater going forward. We think most certainly that environment, that improving that investment environment, most certainly is in the best interest of all Saskatchewan residents and Canada for us to be a strong, growing, vibrant province within the nation of Canada. And that's the conversation that I have opened up, and I think publicly and also in our early conversations with Prime Minister Carney, is let's reset this relationship. that we have between Saskatchewan and the federal government, and let's see if we can't chart a path forward that is good for the residents of Saskatchewan, but is also good for the province of Saskatchewan being an even more significant part economically, as well as contributing to a strong united nation of Canada. That's our goal, that's our focus, and that's the conversation that we are embarking on with recently elected Prime Minister Carney.
I'll leave it on that note. I appreciate your time as always, Premier Mo. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vashi.
Lots to unpack there, and we will do so after a short commercial break with our front bench. With me this evening, Christy Clark, Tony Clement, and Nathan Cullen. There they are. We're back in just 2 minutes. Stick around.
We're going to make sure we support the people from Alberta and Saskatchewan that's felt left out over the last 10 years. I'll be 100% behind them. And I want to build those pipelines on one condition. They use Ontario steel.
My job is to make sure that the temperature is brought down so much that there isn't even a need for a citizen-initiated referenda. And so I think that the Prime Minister has a window here in the next 6 months to be able to meaningfully address the issues that we've put on the table.
We actually believe there's an opportunity to work with the new Prime Minister on everybody giving a little bit and finding a path forward that works for Saskatchewan to grow and prosper within a strong united nation of Canada.
Some mixed messaging this week on the state of the nation, with Ontario reaching west, while Alberta's Danielle Smith would respect a separation referendum and just made it legislatively easier for one to happen. The Prime Minister is set to meet premiers in person on June 2nd in Saskatoon. What should he and those premiers bring to the table? Let's bring in our front bench. Christy Clark is the former Liberal Premier of British Columbia. Tony Clement is a former Conservative federal cabinet minister. And Nathan Cullen is a former NDP MP and BC minister. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. We were sort of talking about this last time, so I thought, given the events in the week in between, it was a good place to pick up on the other end. Over the course of that week, Tony, things went from very hot, like on Monday, Ontario's Premier was calling out Danielle Smith, and then on Tuesday, that clip I just played, like an attempt to bring the temperature down, I think. Scott Moe also making that attempt. Premier Smith, maybe one could argue a little less so. Where in your view do you think the crux of this lies?
Yeah, and I'm speaking as an Ontarian, but I have talked to a lot of Albertans who are not convinced that separation is the next step. So that's great to hear, of course. But we just have to be careful in this country because we are, in many ways, a very fragile place, and things could spin apart very quickly. We saw with David Cameron in the UK when he was Prime Minister. Oh, let's have a referendum on Brexit. What could possibly go wrong? And some could argue that it didn't go the way David Cameron had planned it to go. So I would just, I like the messaging of the premiers. They are trying to be calm. They're trying to find solutions, which is great. There is a sense of grievance in parts of the country. And I think when you're in a leadership role, you should try to have a dialogue about that.
Do you think that, Christy, that all parties genuinely want to have a dialogue about that? And I ask because there have been many points over the last number of years where it has been politically advantageous to be at odds with each other at both levels of government. Do you think that the incentive is there not to be right now?
Well, I think it should be. Unity has to be number one on our agenda. There's nothing, people said on election night, Donald Trump is going to love the outcome because Canada's still in a minority situation. I think he likes the idea when Canada's split down the middle or not, or just when there's lots of infighting. It doesn't do us any good whatsoever. And as Tony said, referenda don't always go the way you'd like them to. And by the way, Mark Carney was there for Brexit when he was the head of the Bank of Canada. So he has lots of experience with this. I would say, though, that Danielle Smith is in the midst of a corruption investigation for the RCMP and the Auditor General's office. She's up to her knees in all kinds of controversy. I wouldn't be at all surprised if she's trying to distract attention from that. But let me finish by saying, because I think Tony was right on this again, aside from the premiers, there is a very legitimate and deeply held sense of grievance in Western Canada about the way the federal government has really tried to tamp down economic growth in the West. It's been a great cost to the West, but it's been a great cost to the rest of the country as well. So, when she speaks of grievance, when Scott Moe speaks of grievance, I understand as a British Columbian where some of that comes from. I just think that this is absolutely the worst time to be showing that to the world.
How do you expect, Nathan, that to play out around the Premier's table? I think that the fact they're meeting in Saskatoon is interesting. They're having more frequent meetings, it would appear, and it seems good that they're all going to meet in person. How do you expect this to unfold in that respect?
Well, I can remember previous prime ministers wanting to avoid these meetings. Most famously, Mr. Harper didn't love them. I don't know if, Christy, you guys got around the table much when you were premier, but they can be grievance sessions for the prime minister and a headache making. Yet, at this time, I think Mr. Carney is very wise to do it because of the threats from the U.S., because of this conversation about trying to break up Canada. Coming out of these notions out of Alberta, getting together is really important. Two things. I mean, a premier has many jobs, but two of the central ones are to fight for their province and also play a constructive role within Canada. It's the greatest country in the world. And I don't want to be too cynical about it, but the timing of this with the premier in Alberta being in this kind of trouble and then raising the specter of, well, maybe Alberta will break away. Well, let's make it easier for Alberta to break away. I think is deeply cynical if there is some connection there. I would also say Mr. Trump, I was surprised in his meeting with Mr. Carney in the White House, how much attention he paid to the outcome of the Canadian election. He knew it was a minority. He knew this sequence of events. I don't know if he knows that much about his own election that just happened, and certainly he's comfortable not speaking truthfully about election outcomes. Regardless, I think Trump is paying attention, and I think Parliament has to be stable. I think Mr. Carney needs a place to negotiate a very difficult process, and that means in a minority parliament finding a good dance partner. And second, you don't need provinces talking about separation. Every province has grievances. Here in BC, we have an NDP government. We've got lots of challenges with the federal government, but we don't rattle the sabers and talk about breaking up the country to express those grievances, as real as they are. I as a Canadian and a patriot, I think there's lots of different ways to do this. I don't think this is helpful, frankly, to Alberta's case, which is producing more oil than it, I think, ever has. And to your point, Vashi, that you're making to Premier Moe, by the numbers, the economy in Saskatchewan and Alberta and a lot of places is doing pretty well. Are there challenges? Sure they are. But let's not pretend this is the dirty 30s or something out on the prairies. This is a pretty good time to invest in Canada. Let's not talk down Canadian investment by saying how terrible it is.
I think, I interviewed both Premier Smith, Tony, and Premier Moe in the past few days and put those challenges to them as Nathan pointed out. I think if I understand them and other people in those provinces, correctly, their thesis is it could have been a lot better if there had been different policies in place. And I think they really, truly associate that very much so, specifically with the former prime minister. Do you anticipate this prime minister will demarcate himself from that? And if so, how substantially?
Yes, I do. You can bookmark this interview because I'm going to say something nice about Mark Carney. I think he actually does want to build pipelines and does want to dig out critical minerals and do some things that are going to help our economy be more independent. And I think he is working on a grand plan to have a greater sovereignty vis-a-vis the United States. This is what I'm predicting. And I think if the state, that is to say, the government of Canada, can actually help facilitate pipelines, that would reduce the grievance factor multifold. Do we have state capacity to actually do that, to get beyond the verbiage and actually get stuff done? Mm-hmm. That's going to be Mark Carney's challenge over the next couple of years for sure.
I guess part of what I'm struggling with is...
I think
just 1 second. I'll get you both in. I promise. I get you both in. I promise you, because it sort of circles back to where we ended last week, right? Which is the idea of the feasibility of the stuff that people are saying will help allay their frustrations. And Christy, I'll get you first on that, and then Nathan.
Well, remember, Mark Carney is the first prime minister we've had in a long time that really understands where money comes from. And where money comes from is from the private sector, and it comes from investment from the private sector. So what he's wanting to focus on is how do we get foreign direct investment in particular to come to Canada, to create jobs, to build LNG plants, to build pipelines if that's on the agenda, to dig up critical minerals, because that adds wealth to the country. And that's what hasn't been happening. And, you know, when you talk about how Canada has become, the poorest of all the, of all the 51st states, if we were to become one, that's because governments across the country have been tamping down on economic growth through endless piles of regulation, by uncertain investment climate and tax climate, and shutting down projects that were just starting to get going by stalling them through regulatory process. So I think he's in the best position to take on this problem of any prime minister we've had in a very, very long time. And I don't think we have needed to solve the problem as clearly as we do right now for a very long time, given the threat that we see from the United States.
Yeah, the only caveat I would add to that is I think it's a fair critique of the economic growth track. I think a lot of the comparisons are around GDP per capita, which is largely informed by the fact that our population grew at such a rapid rate due to immigration policy that the federal government now has reversed. But both of those things I think can be true at the same time. Nathan, your thoughts on what Christy said?
Well, to pick up on something Christy just mentioned, investors do look for predictability, both on regulatory and permitting and those kinds of things. The specter of a referendum question and separating from Canada would be the opposite of a way to encourage investment in your province. Quebec will exactly describe this story for you, as they twice took us to the brink. They cratered their economy, not because they weren't building pipelines, but because they were suggesting political and therefore economic uncertainty and potentially chaos. I guess the one lament I have in this, Vashi, is that this critical question, which is one question about pipelines, we don't have any proponents for any east-west or further west pipelines right now. Even in an expedient regulatory environment, you need a proponent, and that takes years to actually get through and build. Whereas the BC economy and much of the Canadian economy has been doing a fantastic job in investing in lots of value added and could do so much more. I guess I only say that. The grievances are there. Alberta's producing, again, I've got to check this as soon as we get off, but at near record levels of oil right now. To suddenly say we've got to go up 30, 50, 100% more in terms of oil exports has all sorts of other questions attached to it. How long is that going to take? Do you have the workers for that kind of field? Never mind the climate. I guess a prime minister who's looking to leave a legacy and do something nation building shouldn't be only one question in front of them, is to promote pipelines with no proponents that exist right now as somehow that's the panacea to all the Western alienation. It's not. It's become a symbol, and understandably, some people are very frustrated with it. But I'll remind people, we as collective taxpayers dropped, $40 billion to buy a pipeline to the West Coast.
34.
That half of its oil is still going to the U.S. anyways. So, let's not put all the eggs in that basket and say,
because the government made
Mr.
it
Carney
impossible
builds a bunch of
to build the thing for the
pipelines.
private sector.
Well, yeah,
I got
sure.
30 I see
how
both.
we got there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Sorry, I
can't
have 30
project the
seconds.
last 10 years to the next 10 years. We've got to change path, and that's the challenge of Mark Carney, and I wish him well with it.
Yeah.
Christy, last 30 to you.
Well, I mean, I think it's true. Referenda do not make it easier for us to attract investment. If we don't have investment, we don't have jobs. If we don't have jobs, we don't have taxes. If we don't have taxes, we don't have health care. This is a really vital, urgent thing for Mark Carney to take on. And as I said, I don't know if we've had a prime minister that understands it as thoroughly as he does. So I'm feeling pretty good about the future. Danielle Smith's antics don't make me feel much better, but I'm not sure she's really going to end up getting in the way of this, because I think all Canadians know we need jobs, we need investment if we want to grow our economy.
I'm going to leave it on that note. Appreciate the discussion as always. Thanks everyone. Nathan Cullen, Tony Clement, and Christy Clark, our wonderful front bench. We'll take a quick break. We're live in or at Vatican City. After that break, stay right there. A historic moment there in Vatican City after the Catholic Church picked its new pope. Robert Prevost is now the first pope from the United States, and he will take on the title as Pope Leo XIV. U.S. President Donald Trump has responded to the news, calling it an honor for his country.
They have already spoken to us, and we'll see what happens. But again, to have the Pope from the United States of America, that's a great honor. That's a great honor.
Sir, had you asked before? Sir, had you welcome the Pope?
Watching, and they said he's from America. I said that's great.
And CTV's Adrian Gabriel is with us for the latest from Vatican City, I should say, the latest reaction. Adrian, it's good to have you with us. You've been there through the entirety of the day. What's it been like?
Historic on so many different fronts. North America's first pope. People were dancing in the streets. We were here when we first heard the roar of the crowd. Then we saw the white smoke rise from the Sistine Chapel, and then the bell toll at St. Peter's Basilica. I think many in the crowd were stunned when they heard the name. They actually were unaware, many, of who this cardinal was. He was on some people's radar, but there was a general thought that we would not see an American pope because America holds such a large piece of the equation in the world. To name an American pope wasn't something that many thought would happen, though. As we take a step back, perhaps this is a pope for the moment, Vashi.
And we played that clip from U.S. President Donald Trump speaking of the moment. And there's been a ton of digging into this Pope's social media posts. What can you tell us in that vein? Because he's been kind of critical of the Trump administration.
Absolutely. Yeah, he has been. He's reposted multiple news stories. One, questioning Donald Trump's immigration policy. And another one, taking a shot at J.D. Vance, saying Jesus, never asked people to level themselves up or to measure themselves, rather, by who they love in the world. So, this is a pope and formerly a cardinal who was looked at as the least traditionally American cardinal. He is very different. He is from what we might have expected. Definitely someone who Pope Francis, I have been told today multiple times, a selection that Pope Francis would have loved. Someone who will continue to build the blocks along the path that Pope Francis laid before his passing. And it will be really interesting. This is a geopolitical time when we're looking around the world. We're looking at conflicts. We're looking at a rise in authoritarianism, in different parts of the world. And this is a pope that, frankly, does not align with many of the policies from the current administration in the United States. He's likely going to be called to speak in the United States very soon. We can imagine that potentially Donald Trump may be coming to the Vatican very soon. So many things at play. And when we talk about a pope for this time, it really will be interesting to watch.
Adrian, thank you so much. Adrian Gabriel for us in Vatican City. We're back in a moment.
Thank you.
Prime Minister Mark Carney reacting to the election of a new pope, writing on social media, "I offer my prayers and best wishes to His Holiness Pope Leo XIV on his election. An historic day for Catholics and all who look to the Vatican for guidance. At a time of global challenges, may his pontificate carry forward a mission of solidarity, compassion, and dignity for all." Pope Leo XIV is the first one from the United States of America. We will have more coverage of his election ahead right here on CTV News Channel. I'll leave our program Power Play there. Thanks so much for watching.